So maybe it's a good time now to start looking, Shiv, now that you've given us this broad overview, maybe a good idea to start looking at the data set.
Exactly. Fantastic.
Okay. So GV, we'll have Shiv walk us through the data, right?
Right. Yeah. So you want to open the Excel?
I will open the Excel. I'll open the Excel.
So perhaps we can start. As I said, we are going to go from the customer backwards, right? The sales backwards in the value chain of the company. So first thing we look at is the sales information, which is basically how much of the product was sold and at what price was it sold, and during each month. So all of this data, most of this data is available for the entire 24 months. So from April 2019 all the way to March 2021, to show all the different impacts that happened, right? The BS4 to BS6 transition, the impact of COVID, the recovery from COVID, and so on and so forth. So what you see in the sales data is, as I said, the 10 gear assemblies, which are the finished products that ACE is selling. And for each of those gear assemblies, you'll see the sales for each month. For example, what you're seeing right now is the April 2019. It shows the total sales of that gear assembly. The numbers to 8,960 units of that finished product were sold, and the price at which it was sold, 420 rupees. That was the price it was sold at, and so on. So you'll see for May 2019, June 2019, quantity and price for all of the months, right? The 24 months. So that's the first data set that you'll see. And when you see this data set, I think you'll see the impacts that we talked about in the sales. You'll see that the products number 1, 2 are the BS4 parts. You'll see that there, the sales of those products. So one of the things that I want you to analyze is what happens to sales of those BS4 products as the transition to BS6 happens on April 1st, 2020. So that's the first question. And then you will see that the parts number 3 to 8, they are applicable for both BS4 and BS6. So that means that their sales are not going to stop just because of BS4 or 6. But can you see some seasonal pattern in the year? That's my second question. Seasonal pattern means at some point in the year the sales is high, and then another point in the year the sales is low. Because we have 2 years, we can start to see potentially some seasonal patterns. So my second question is, are there any seasonal patterns you see in the sales data? And then the last set of products is the BS6 products, which initially you'll see 0 because BS6 is not kick in till April 1st, 2020. And then you'll start to see their sales. So the question on that one is, what is the pattern of sales of these BS6 products? When did they start selling, and why did they start selling at that point? When you did see their sales start. So that is the third question. The fourth question is, what is the impact of COVID on the sales of these products? So as production actually and sales actually slowed down after the pandemic struck in March 2020, what kind of impact are you seeing from the pandemic through the next several months, right? As the first wave hit and then receded, what kind of impact do you see in the sales of these products? So that's another question I have. And then I also want to find out some things like what are the products that are giving me the highest sales quantity, and what are the products that are giving me the highest sales value? Value means revenue, right? Which means not only so if you multiply the quantity and the price, and that is when you get the sales value. So which products gave me the best sales value that I should pay more attention to? Because I obviously want to pay a lot of attention to products that are giving me a lot of revenue. I want to make sure that there's no shortage of those products and so on. So those are other questions I have on that first table, right? What's the products that are giving me the maximum revenue? What are the products that are giving me the minimum revenue? Which means, I might rethink whether it's worth selling those products in the next coming years. So those are some questions I have on that first table you see.
Okay. The next table seems to be more from a regional perspective. I see. Yeah. Maybe you can help us understand this table.
Yes, absolutely. So what we then say is because ACE gear sells in all four regions of the country, right? And automobile clusters are there, as you know, in multiple parts. So around the west, right, Mumbai, Pune, especially, you have a cluster of manufacturers. And in the south, of course, Chennai is the Detroit of India. So there is a lot of manufacturing activity. There's also east and north where significant activity happens for companies such as Tata Motors and Mahindras and so on. So the regional sales distribution is given for just 3 months and is given only for the 8 products in this particular case. This because of course the product 9 and 10 were not selling in that particular 3 months we looked at, October 2019, November 2019, and December 2019. So this is called the Q3 of the financial year 20. So you'll see 3 months. And for each of the 3 months, you'll see for the 8 products that were selling at that time, you'll see the overall sales, but you'll also see in which region how many units of that product sold. So you'll see north, east, west, and south. So if you take gear assembly 1, for example, in October 2019, it sold 14,400 units, right? And most of the sales came from east and south. So 11,200 units in east and 3,200 from south. There were no sales in north and west for that particular assembly. That could be because that assembly is used by a particular manufacturer who only has factories in east and south, right? That could be the reason for that. And similarly, you'll see for all of the 8 gears, what's the regional sales for each of the 4 regions. So that's what's there in this table. And in terms of questions around this table, I want to understand, which regions are most important to me. Where is that I'm getting the maximum sales quantity, but also the maximum sales revenue. Now you have to look at both tables to figure the revenue side of it. So that's one part I want to find out. And then I also want to find out, is there, for example, I could give specific focus to some regions by appointing a regional sales agent. So what these regional sales agents do is they are actually stationed or located in that particular region in one of the cities, and they will make sure that the customers in that region get regular visit, their feedback is incorporated, the schedules are clarified, and so on. Then the agents can actually help improve customer relationship, but also improve the sales. So if I want to appoint a few agents, then which regions should I appoint these agents in, and how many agents should I appoint in each region? If I want to appoint the agent in such a way that it is somewhat related to the amount of revenue I'm making from that region. So every region in which I'm making, more than a certain number of products are sold or revenue is gathered, I want to appoint those agents. And I have a fixed budget for how many agents I can appoint. Then how should I appoint those agents? Which region should I appoint more, and which region should I appoint less? So that's another question that I would like to have. And then I'd also like to see, are there some products that are clustered in some region, right? Some products are only in certain region, some products are only in certain other region. Is there a pattern like that? So those are some of the questions that I have from a regional perspective.
Okay. Then the next table seems to be, let me unfreeze this, and now let's look at this table. Okay.
Now this one is actually about production, right? So we talked earlier in the case study how, based on how much you sell, you want to start producing enough so that you do not miss any sales, right? So you have enough product to sell, depending on the customer demand. If the customer is demanding 10,000, then if I have only 9,000, I'm going to lose the 1,000 of sales, right? So basically, I don't want to do that. So I want to make enough so that I can satisfy all the demand that's there. But I don't want to make too much, because if I make too much, then that product will lie idle as inventory. either with me or in the regional distribution center or somewhere. So that's also not good. Another thing that is important from a production planning perspective is you don't want production to go up and down as much as the variation in sales. So sales may suddenly peak in 1 month and drop in another month because there are many factors. Like, for example, if there is a strike, a labor unrest in a car manufacturer's factory, and as you all follow the headlines, Toyota had such a major unrest in 2019, for example, that they had to shut down the factory for a number of months. So then what happens is suddenly your demand from your customer is going to drop in 1 month. Or it could be a new model that's getting launched by that manufacturer. And initial months, you have very high demand, right? Because customers are just trying to get their hands on the product as quickly as they can. A recent example is Mahindra, where they introduced a new Thar, right? The Thar SUV. And the demand is so much that even if they produce for 1 whole year, they can't catch up to the waiting list, right? So those types of things happen where the demand is fluctuating a lot. But you can't flex your production. You don't want to change your production so rapidly, because then it means that number of labor will be idle for some time, and suddenly they'll be overworked and you won't have enough labor. So what you want is a production that is more smooth. It should be responsive to demand, but it should not be as much jagged, going up and down rapidly like the demand. So you have to have a production plan that's more smooth and follows the sales plan. So what you see in this table is for all of the 10 assemblies that we make, you'll see a thing called beginning inventory, which means at the start of the month, how many of those products were already in my store, right, finished goods store, or in my warehouse. And then you see how much was actually produced that month, and you'll see the ending inventory, which is at the end of the month, how much products did I have on hand at the end of the month. So for every single one of those months, from April 19 to March 21, you'll see the beginning inventory of the gear assembly 1, for example. You'll see how much of gear assembly 1 was produced that month, and then you'll see how much of the inventory is still lying with me at the end of the month. And I think, as you can logically imagine, the ending inventory, the inventory that I have at the end of the month, will be equal to how much did I have at the beginning, how much did I make, and then how much did I sell. So logically, you can put those 3 things together to find what's the ending inventory. And so similarly, you will have that data for all the 24 months for all the 10 products, right? So that's what you see in this particular table. One thing you'll see is that production does vary. So if you look at gear assembly 1, we produced 7,000 in April, we increased to 9,000 in May, and then we kept 9,000 for some months, and probably then we start decreasing or increasing depending on the customer demand. So you see that it further to 10,000 in September and so on. So there is a pattern to this. But if you see the same gear assembly 1 in the previous table, if you see the sales, if I can go back to the first table on the top, right? If you see the sales of gear assembly 1, it was actually 8,960, then it fell to 7,960, then it suddenly increased to 10,960, and then 5,960, and so on, right? So you see that there's a lot of ups and downs in the sales of the product. But production is also going up and down, but it's not going as rapidly up and down. And this is the job of what we call the sales and operations planning, right? That we saw in that chart earlier, which says, okay, how is my sales going to behave? And therefore, how is my production should look for each month? So the sales and operation planning and the master production scheduling, which is the next step we saw, these 2 activities will make sure that we produce the right amount and that we produce it in a smooth way and not so up and down as much as the sales is.
So Shiv, just for my understanding, I mean, do I understand that each gear assembly is manufactured by a different machine and has different as people associated with that manufacturing? Because the reason I'm asking that question is that we are trying to smooth each row and we're not taking the total and smoothing the total, right?
Yes,
so,
that's an excellent question. We should also be smoothing the overall production. So that is also what the MPS tries to look at like what is the resources available. So to your question, it is all shared, right? It's not dedicated lines. You'll see later on that in the production scheduling part of the case study that the same hobbing machine is actually used to make two different
Oh, I
gears,
see.
right?
Okay.
So yes, it is all shared, and the goal is definitely, like you said, to smooth not only one product but to smooth the entire system.
Okay.
So two observations I had, Shiv. First is, this table that you've shown us seems very similar to the ledger that we were seeing in the e-commerce case. Because there, what we saw was that opening stock plus incoming goods minus sales was equal to closing stock. And it seems to me, at least at first glance, that you're looking at something similar here, right?
Except that the only thing is that their incoming can be anything. Variation in incoming is not a problem there. But here it has to be smooth because for whatever we discussed just now, production needs to be smoothened. You can't just have variability in production.
Right. The second sort of thing that immediately strikes me is that if production is smooth and sales are sort of variable, then the amount that I have in my warehouse will keep changing constantly. Actually, it'll have big swings,
Yes,
and that would be another challenge perhaps for the warehouse manager to manage.
Yes, absolutely, Milind. That is very true. And that is the role the inventory plays, right? The inventory is both bad and good, or good and bad, right? So the bad aspect of inventory is if you have a lot of inventory, then it's idle products, it is locked up capital, it is not actually being used further in the value chain. But the good part of inventory is that it helps you to do the smoothing. It makes sure that your production does not exactly match your sales, because you can dip into the inventory when you need more, and if you're producing more, you can add to the inventory. But as you said rightly, the inventory is a very important thing to manage. The store, the space that is required, the security that is required to manage the inventory, the warehousing, and sometimes some production, like we know in the case of vaccines now, cold storage is required, not in this kind of product, but those things are all part of the inventory management. Is do you have the right storage? Do you have the right conditions, ambient conditions for the storage? Do we have enough security and control over the inventory? So that's very important. So one of the questions that therefore I will have in this is, how do you manage inventory from a warehouse manager perspective? How much is the maximum and the minimum? And therefore, what is the kind of percentage variation I'm having in that inventory over the 24 months, right? So how big a space should I take, right? Like, or should I, what's the level of variation that you see in that inventory is an important question in this exercise.
So you have given us the inventory data as well, right, Shiv? So, and to me, at first glance, it seems very similar to the production plan. So what is the difference between the two? Maybe you can explain this table and also tell us what is the difference from the production plan.
Yes. So the first table we just saw was is called the production plan for the finished product. So think of if you think back on that slide we saw, there is two stages in this production, right? So first we have to take the blanks and we have to make the gears. And then we have to assemble the gears together and test and pack and ship it. So these are the two stages, right? So what you see in this table right here on the screen is the finished product assembly production plan. So that means I have to make 7,000 assemblies in April 2019. That's what you see there, right? But to make 7,000 assemblies, I need to have the two components available to make the assembly. So what you see in the below table is actually the plan for the first stage, which is how do I make the two gears and how much do I make each month, so that I can then create the assembly in the second stage. So what you see here is the gears 2A, 2B, 3A, 3A, 3B, and so on. So these are the gears actually required to make the assemblies 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we are showing just 6 just for the sake of managing the amount of data. So for each of those assemblies, there are 2 gears that are required. And what is the production plan for those 2 gears? So this is how we go level by level, right? We start with how much we produce of the finished product, how much should we produce of each of the sub-assemblies, and how much should we produce of each of those parts, and so on. So what you see here is the production plan for the individual gears themselves, because the hobbing and broaching are the 2 steps required to make the individual gear. And then the assembly is the next stage where we put the gears together, test it, and align it, and pack it, and ship it.
Okay. That actually, then my natural question is, what was the term that you used? Bill of material?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The term that you had used on the slide was bill of material, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Here we are seeing the bill of material in action, right?
And that should be a little bit of comfort for us, perhaps, because then from a purchasing perspective, I can I can smooth out the purchases because the same blank is being used into products.
Absolutely.
Hopefully.
Absolutely. So you even if you have, let's say, more demand for 3A, but at the same month you have less demand for 4A, that means you don't have to change your purchasing of blank 011, because there'll be more use in one place and less use in another place. So the more you have common components, the more you can actually smooth your production and make the product structure less complex. And this is the reason that automotive manufacturers go for platforms, the strategy of platforms. So if you look at many cars, they can be built on the same platform. So for example, right now the Volkswagen Group is launching a platform called MQB A0 in India. And on top of this single platform, which uses common components in the chassis and common engines, they can make SUVs, they can make compact sedans, they can make mid-size sedans, they can make hatchbacks. So all of these, and the strategy behind that is exactly this: is you have fewer components, you have fewer sub-assemblies on which you can build multiple different types of products.
Very, very interesting. So Shiv, all the other Excel sheets have the same data, right? There's no other raw data.
Yes, there is one more aspect. So here we have seen the scheduled production of finished product, sales of finished product, then regional sales, and we saw the production of finished products. Then we saw the production of the gears themselves. And then there is the aspect of scheduling, which is shift by shift. How much do I need to make in the hobbing machine and in the broaching machine? So that's the data we haven't probably seen yet. And then there's also data on purchasing.
Okay.